The first time Jacob noticed something was off, it was subtle. A missed call she didn't explain, a text she quickly swiped away, followed by a nervous laugh. Claire, his wife of 8 years, had always been transparent, or so he thought. That night, as they sat together on the couch watching their favorite show, she seemed distracted, her phone screen lighting up repeatedly. "Who keeps texting you this late?" Jacob asked, his tone light but curious. Claire barely glanced up, her fingers quickly locking the screen. "Oh, just work stuff. You know how it is." She gave him a tight smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Jacob didn't press further. He trusted her, or at least he wanted to. After all, Claire had always been his anchor, the woman who stood by him when his business struggled, the one who believed in him when no one else did. But trust, he would soon learn, is fragile. Over the next few weeks, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic. She started coming home later than usual, citing meetings and team dinners that seemed to stretch into the night. Jacob noticed how she'd linger in their driveway, finishing a phone call before stepping inside, her laughter fading as she crossed the threshold. One evening, as Claire stepped into the shower, Jacob's curiosity got the better of him. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, and despite his better judgment, he unlocked it using her familiar birthday code. What he found was enough to make his chest tighten. A string of texts from someone named Eli flooded the screen. Eli, "Can't stop thinking about last night." Eli, "When can I see you again?" Eli, "You're incredible, Claire. He doesn't deserve you." Jacob stared at the screen, his breath shallow. His hands trembled as he scrolled further, the texts growing increasingly explicit. There were even photos. Grainy, hastily taken snapshots of Claire and Eli together at a dimly lit restaurant. Jacob's world began to spin. He felt the crushing weight of betrayal settle over him, but he swallowed the lump in his throat and quickly locked her phone, placing it back where he found it. That night, as Claire slept peacefully beside him, Jacob lay wide awake, his mind racing. The woman he had loved, trusted, and built a life with was leading a double life. But Jacob wasn't one to act on impulse. He knew that confronting Claire without proof would only lead to lies and excuses. Instead, he resolved to gather every piece of evidence he could, ensuring that when the moment came, there would be no escape for her. He started with subtle changes. Installing a tracking app on her phone was surprisingly easy thanks to her predictable habits. He also placed a discreet recorder in her car, knowing that her drive to and from work would likely hold the answers he needed. Each piece of evidence he uncovered confirmed his worst fears. The phone calls, the late-night rendezvous, the affectionate nicknames. They painted a vivid picture of her infidelity. One evening, while reviewing the recordings, Jacob stumbled upon a conversation that made his blood boil. "Eli, when are you finally going to leave him? You deserve better than this." Claire, "I don't know, Eli. It's complicated. He's not a bad person, just boring." Jacob paused the recording, his jaw clenched. Boring. Was that all he was to her now? But as the anger coursed through him, it sharpened his focus. If Claire thought he was boring, she was about to see just how wrong she was. Jacob's plan began to take shape. He wasn't content to simply confront Claire. He wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal. He wanted her to see everything she had thrown away, and he wanted Eli to realize the price of meddling in another man's marriage. Over the next few days, Jacob meticulously documented every interaction Claire had with Eli. He hired a private investigator to follow them, ensuring that no detail was missed. Photos, videos, timestamps, he compiled it all into a damning portfolio of evidence. But Jacob's revenge wouldn't stop at exposure. He wanted to ensure that Claire's actions had lasting consequences, both socially and financially. He quietly reached out to their lawyer, updating his will and securing their joint accounts. He made sure that when the time came, Claire would have no claim to his assets. Jacob also began subtly pulling away from her. He stopped initiating conversations, avoided physical intimacy, and spent more time at work or out with friends. Claire, absorbed in her affair, barely noticed the change. The turning point came one Friday evening. Claire had claimed she was going to a work retreat for the weekend, but Jacob knew better. He tracked her location to a cozy bed and breakfast just outside the city, where she and Eli were enjoying a romantic getaway. As Jacob stared at the tracking app on his phone, a sense of calm washed over him. The time for planning was over. It was time to act. Jacob spent the Saturday morning executing the next phase of his meticulously crafted plan. His calm exterior betrayed the storm of emotions within, but he knew better than to let his feelings control him. Revenge, he reasoned, was best served cold. He called his private investigator and requested one last round of surveillance on Claire and Eli. He needed every detail of their weekend tryst, from their arrival at the bed and breakfast to their cozy dinners. By the afternoon, Jacob had a fresh batch of incriminating photos and videos. One photo particularly caught his eye: Claire and Eli sitting across from each other at a candlelit dinner. Claire was laughing, her hand grazing Eli's arm, the way she used to touch Jacob in the early days of their relationship. Jacob clenched his fists, forcing himself to look away. "You'll regret this, Claire," he muttered under his breath. That evening, Jacob gathered his closest friends and family for what he called an important announcement dinner. Everyone was curious, especially since Jacob wasn't known for hosting social events. The guest list included some of Claire's closest friends, whom Jacob had deliberately invited. By the time the guests arrived, Jacob had transformed his living room into a presentation area. A projector was set up, the screen ready to display what he'd uncovered. As the guests mingled, Jacob maintained a composed demeanor, even greeting Claire's best friend, Lisa, with a warm smile. "It's good to see you, Lisa. I think tonight will be eye-opening for all of us." Lisa gave him a puzzled look, but didn't press further. Meanwhile, at the bed and breakfast, Claire was completely oblivious to the storm brewing back home. She and Eli had spent the day exploring the nearby countryside, taking photos and indulging in wine tastings. "This has been perfect," Claire said as they returned to their room that evening. Eli smiled, pulling her close. "You deserve perfect, Claire. You've put up with that dull husband of yours for far too long." Claire hesitated for a moment, guilt flickering in her eyes. But it quickly vanished as Eli kissed her. Back at the house, the guests had settled in, and Jacob stood at the center of the room, commanding everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady. "I've gathered you here because I believe in transparency and honesty, qualities that unfortunately seem to be in short supply these days." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Jacob picked up a remote and clicked a button. The projector lit up, displaying the first photo of Claire and Eli. Gasps echoed through the room. "Meet Eli," Jacob said, his tone laced with sarcasm. "The man my wife has been spending her time with while I thought she was at work retreats." He clicked through the photos, each one more damning than the last. Claire and Eli holding hands, sharing kisses, laughing together. Lisa, sitting near the front, covered her mouth in shock. "Jacob, are you sure about this?" Jacob nodded grimly. "These aren't just photos. I have videos, audio recordings, and even financial records showing how Claire has been using our joint account to fund her escapades." The room was a mix of disbelief and outrage. Claire's betrayal wasn't just a personal affront. It felt like a violation to everyone who had believed in their relationship. The climax of the evening came when Jacob played a recording of Claire and Eli's conversation from the previous weekend. Eli: "He doesn't suspect a thing, does he?" Claire: "Not at all. Jacob's too trusting. He'd never believe I could do this." The room erupted in murmurs, some guests shaking their heads in disgust. Jacob let the recording play to the end before turning to face the room. "I've spent years building a life with Claire, trusting her, supporting her dreams, and this is how she repays me. But let me assure you, this story isn't over yet." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Claire thought she could humiliate me in secret. Tonight, I return the favor." As the guests began to leave, many offered Jacob words of support. Lisa lingered, her expression conflicted. "I don't know what to say, Jacob. I never imagined Claire could do something like this." Jacob gave her a tight smile. "Neither did I. But people reveal their true selves when they think no one's watching." Lisa nodded, squeezing his arm before leaving. Meanwhile, Claire's phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and texts from her friends, but she was too busy enjoying her evening with Eli to notice. It wasn't until the next morning that she finally checked her messages. The sight of dozens of notifications made her stomach drop. "Lisa, Claire, what the hell is going on? Jacob just showed us everything." Amy, "You really messed up this time. I can't believe you'd do this to him." Mom, "Call me immediately. We need to talk." Claire's heart raced as she scrolled through the messages, each one more damning than the last. "What's wrong?" Eli asked, noticing her pale face. Claire shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's Jacob. He knows. He showed everyone." Back home, Jacob poured himself a cup of coffee, savoring the quiet morning. The events of the previous night had been emotionally exhausting, but they had also given him a sense of closure. He knew Claire would return home eventually, but he wasn't afraid of the confrontation. He had all the power now, and he intended to use it wisely. Claire's drive home from the bed and breakfast was anything but serene. Her mind raced as she pieced together the gravity of what Jacob had done. The messages from her friends and family replayed in her mind like a broken record. Eli had offered to drive her back, but Claire refused. "This is my mess," she told him. "I need to fix it." As the familiar streets of their neighborhood came into view, her anxiety skyrocketed. She parked in the driveway, staring at the front door, unsure of what awaited her inside. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. The silence inside was deafening. "Jacob?" she called, her voice trembling. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a steaming cup of coffee. His expression was calm but unreadable, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside her. "Claire," he said simply, not bothering to stand. The tension in the room was suffocating. Claire hesitated before sitting across from him, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Jacob, He raised a hand to silence her. "Before you say anything, let me make one thing clear. I've heard enough of your lies." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I wasn't lying to hurt you, Jacob. I made a mistake." Jacob's laugh was cold, cutting through her words. "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to lock the door, Claire. What you did was calculated. You lied to me, stole from me, and humiliated me. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Claire's tears spilled over as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was unhappy, Jacob." Jacob's gaze hardened. "Unhappy? And you thought the solution was to betray me? To destroy everything we built?" "I didn't know how else to handle it," she admitted, her voice breaking. "You were always so focused on work, and I felt invisible." Jacob leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Invisible? Do you know what I was working so hard for, Claire? For us? For the life we said we wanted. While I was out there building our future, you were tearing it apart." The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. Claire wiped her tears, desperation creeping into her voice. "Jacob, I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, just give me another chance." Jacob shook his head slowly. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about second chances. This is about consequences." He stood up and placed a thick folder on the table. "This is everything I've gathered, photos, recordings, financial statements. It's all here, and it's already been shared with everyone who matters." Claire's breath hitched as she stared at the folder. "Why would you do that?" "Because you didn't just betray me, Claire. You betrayed everyone who believed in you. Your friends, your family, they deserve to know the truth. Claire's voice rose in anger. So what now? You just destroy my life and walk away? Jacob's eyes narrowed. Destroy your life? You did that all on your own. I'm just making sure you face the consequences of your actions. He pulled out a second folder, this one containing the divorce papers. This is the next step. You'll sign these, and we'll be done. I've already secured everything legally. You won't touch a penny more than you're entitled to, and trust me, that isn't much. Claire's hands trembled as she reached for the papers. Jacob, please, don't do this. We can fix this. Jacob's voice softened, but his resolve remained firm. There's nothing to fix, Claire. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. As Claire signed the papers, the reality of her situation sank in. The man she had taken for granted was no longer willing to fight for their marriage. She had gambled everything and lost. When she finished, Jacob gathered the papers and stood. You have until the end of the week to move out, he said. After that, I don't want to see you again. Claire looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. Jacob, I'm sorry. For everything. Jacob's expression remained unreadable. I know, he said simply before walking away. That night, Jacob sat alone in his empty house, reflecting on the events of the day. The pain of Claire's betrayal was still fresh, but he felt a sense of closure. He had taken control of the situation and ensured that she couldn't continue to manipulate him. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Claire spent the night in the guest bedroom, her mind racing as she replayed every moment of the confrontation. Jacob's words echoed in her ears. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. The realization of her actions and their consequences hit her with a force she wasn't prepared for. The next morning, she woke up early, hoping to catch Jacob before he left for work. She wanted to talk to him, to try to salvage whatever was left of their relationship. But as she walked into the kitchen, she found a note on the counter instead. Claire, I'll be staying elsewhere for the week. Take this time to pack your things and leave. I've arranged for movers to help you on Friday. If you need anything, contact my lawyer. Claire stared at the note, her hands trembling. The finality of his words left no room for negotiation. She felt the walls closing in, the life she had taken for granted crumbling around her. Jacob, on the other hand, felt a sense of liberation as he drove to his new temporary residence. He had rented a sleek, modern apartment in the city, a far cry from the suburban home he once shared with Claire. As he unpacked his belongings, he found himself reflecting on the decisions he had made. Was he angry? Absolutely. But more than that, he was determined not to let Claire's betrayal define him. That evening, Jacob met with his lawyer, Rebecca, to finalize the divorce proceedings. You've done everything right so far, Rebecca said, reviewing the documents. Claire doesn't have much leverage here, and with the evidence you've gathered, the settlement will be in your favor. Jacob nodded. That's all I want. No drama, no loopholes, just a clean break. Rebecca smiled. You're handling this better than most people would. It's clear you've thought everything through. Meanwhile, Claire's attempts to reach out to her friends were met with cold responses. The photos and recordings Jacob had shared at the dinner party had spread like wildfire, leaving her reputation in tatters. Lisa, her closest friend, finally agreed to meet her for coffee, but the conversation was far from comforting. Claire, I don't even know who you are anymore, Lisa said, her voice tinged with disappointment. How could you do this to Jacob? He loved you. I know, Claire said, her voice breaking. I messed up. I didn't think it would go this far. Lisa shook her head. That's the problem, Claire. You didn't think, and now you're paying the price. By midweek, Claire began packing her belongings, each item a painful reminder of the life she had destroyed. The wedding album, her anniversary gifts, the souvenirs from their vacations, all of it felt like artifacts from another life. She debated reaching out to Jacob one last time, but decided against it. What could she say that would make a difference? He had made it clear that he was done with her, and she couldn't blame him. On Friday morning, the movers arrived as scheduled. Claire directed them in silence, her heart heavy with regret. As she watched the last box being loaded into the truck, she took one final look around the house. The memories of their life together flashed before her. Laughter-filled dinners, quiet mornings, shared dreams. And now, it was all gone. Jacob returned to the house that evening, finding it empty and quiet. He walked through the rooms, noting the absence of Claire's presence. It was bittersweet, but he knew it was necessary. In the living room, he found a note she had left on the coffee table. "Jacob, I know nothing I say can undo the pain I've caused, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. You deserved better, and I failed you. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Claire Jacob folded the note and placed it in a drawer. He didn't feel anger or sadness, just a sense of closure. The next day, Jacob began redecorating the house, erasing the remnants of their shared life. He painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and even bought new artwork to hang in the living room. It was more than just a physical transformation. It was symbolic of his decision to move forward. He also reconnected with old friends, spending time with people who reminded him of who he was before his marriage. Slowly but surely, he began to rediscover himself. Claire, on the other hand, was struggling to adapt to her new reality. The apartment she had rented was small and impersonal, a stark contrast to the home she had shared with Jacob. She tried to focus on her work, but the whispers and judgment from her colleagues made it nearly impossible. The fallout from Jacob's revelations had spread far and wide, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. She thought about reaching out to Eli, but deep down, she knew he wasn't the solution. He had been a fleeting escape, nothing more. For the first time in months, Claire was forced to confront herself, her choices, her actions, and the consequences they had brought. Jacob's transformation continued to take shape, both inside and out. With Claire gone, and the house no longer a reminder of betrayal, he began to feel a renewed sense of control over his life. He threw himself into his work, earning accolades and promotions that reflected his focus and dedication. At the same time, he explored new interests he had long ignored during his marriage. Photography, a hobby he had dabbled in years ago, became a passion. Every weekend, he ventured out with his camera, capturing landscapes and candid moments that seemed to echo his own journey of healing and growth. One Saturday morning, Jacob was at a local coffee shop editing photos on his laptop when a familiar voice broke his concentration. "Jacob, is that you?" He looked up to see Emily, an old college friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Her warm smile and friendly demeanor instantly lifted his mood. "Emily, wow, it's been ages," Jacob said, standing up to greet her. They spent the next hour catching up, reminiscing about their college days and sharing updates about their lives. Jacob found himself laughing more than he had in months, feeling a sense of ease he hadn't realized he missed. As they parted ways, Emily gave him a hug. "Let's not lose touch this time," she said with a smile. Jacob nodded. "Definitely not." Meanwhile, Claire's world continued to unravel. The whispers at work had turned into open judgment, and her social circle had all but disappeared. Even Lisa, who had initially offered her some support, had grown distant. One evening, Claire decided to reach out to Jacob, despite knowing it was futile. She dialed his number, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. The line rang twice before going to voicemail. "Jacob, it's me," she began hesitantly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I've said it before, but I need you to know how much I regret everything. I hope you're doing okay." She hung up, knowing deep down that he wouldn't call back. Jacob listened to the voicemail later that night. As he heard Claire's voice, he felt a pang of sympathy, but no desire to respond. Her words no longer held power over him. Instead, he focused on the new connections he was building. Over the next few weeks, he and Emily began spending more time together, their friendship growing into something deeper. Emily's presence was a stark contrast to what Jacob had experienced with Claire. She was genuine, supportive, and unpretentious. She didn't try to fix him or dwell on his past. She simply enjoyed being with him in the present. One evening, as they walked along a quiet trail, Emily asked a question that caught Jacob off guard. "Do you think you've moved on?" Jacob paused, considering her words. "I think I have," he said slowly. "Not because I've forgotten what happened, but because I've learned from it. I've realized that my happiness doesn't depend on anyone else. It depends on me." Emily smiled, reaching for his hand. "That's what I admire about you. You've turned something painful into something powerful." Jacob felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he saw a future that didn't involve looking back. Claire, on the other hand, was haunted by the choices she had made. She tried to focus on rebuilding her life, but the weight of regret was ever present. One evening, while scrolling through social media, she came across a photo of Jacob and Emily. They were at an art exhibit, Jacob's arm around Emily as they smiled at the camera. Claire's heart sank. She had always thought there might be a chance to make amends, to salvage some semblance of their relationship. But seeing Jacob happy without her shattered that illusion. She closed her laptop, tears streaming down her face as she whispered to herself, "I did this. I have no one to blame but me." Jacob, meanwhile, had no idea that Claire was still following his life from a distance. His focus was on the present, on his career, his hobbies, and his growing relationship with Emily. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Emily turned to Jacob with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "you've been through so much, but you've come out stronger. I think that's what makes you incredible." Jacob smiled, squeezing her hand. "And I think meeting you is what made me realize it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The betrayal and heartbreak that once defined his life were now just chapters in a story he had rewritten on his own terms. The weeks turned into months, and Jacob's life flourished in ways he hadn't imagined. His relationship with Emily became a cornerstone of his happiness, offering a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. Together, they traveled, explored new hobbies, and supported each other's ambitions. Jacob's photography began to gain recognition beyond his local community. One of his collections was featured in an online magazine, earning him invitations to galleries and exhibitions. Emily accompanied him to these events, her pride in his work evident in every smile and encouraging word. One evening, as they celebrated the success of his latest exhibit, Emily raised a glass to toast him. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes sparkling. Jacob smiled, clinking his glass with hers, "and to leaving the past where it belongs." Meanwhile, Claire's life remained in stark contrast. She had managed to hold on to her job, but the strain of her tarnished reputation made every day a challenge. The once vibrant social circle she had enjoyed was gone, replaced by isolation and regret. One particularly difficult day, Claire decided to visit the neighborhood she used to call home. She parked her car down the street from the house she had shared with Jacob, staring at the property from a distance. The house looked different. New paint, a garden in full bloom. But it still held the echoes of a life she had destroyed. As she sat in her car, memories flooded her mind. Their first dinner party, the evenings spent laughing over board games, the mornings when Jacob would surprise her with breakfast in bed. The weight of those memories was suffocating. Claire had thought she could rebuild her life, but the void left by Jacob's absence was impossible to fill. Jacob, however, was focused on the future. He and Emily began discussing the idea of moving in together, a step that both excited and terrified him. "I just want to make sure we're ready," Jacob said one evening as they sat on the couch. Emily placed her hand on his. "We don't have to rush anything, Jacob, but when you're ready, I'm here." Her patience and understanding reminded Jacob of what he had missed in his previous relationship. With Emily, there were no games, no lies, just honesty and care. One weekend, while organizing his photography files, Jacob came across a folder labeled Old Memories. Curiosity got the better of him, and he opened it, finding photos from his life with Claire. He scrolled through the images, a mix of happy moments and candid shots. One photo in particular caught his eye, a picture of the two of them on their anniversary, smiling as they held hands. For a moment, Jacob felt a pang of sadness, not for Claire, but for the person he had been back then. He realized how much he had grown since those days, how far he had come in reclaiming his identity. With a deep breath, Jacob deleted the folder. It was a symbolic act, one that marked the end of a chapter he was ready to leave behind. Claire's struggles continued to mount. One evening, she decided to write Jacob a letter, a final attempt to seek closure, even if she didn't expect a response. Jacob, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry for everything, for the lies, the betrayal, and the pain I caused you. You didn't deserve any of it. I hope you found happiness because you truly deserve it. Claire. She mailed the letter, unsure if Jacob would ever read it. When the letter arrived, Jacob hesitated before opening it. As he read Claire's words, he felt a mix of emotions, sympathy, closure, and relief. He didn't respond. There was no need. The past was the past, and his focus was on the present. That evening, he shared the moment with Emily, who listened quietly before offering a reassuring smile. You've come so far, Jacob. You don't owe her anything. Jacob nodded. I know. And I think this was the last thing I needed to let go completely. Later that night, as Jacob and Emily sat on the balcony, watching the city lights, he felt a profound sense of peace. This, he said, gesturing to the view, is what I never thought I'd have again. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. You deserve it, Jacob. Every bit of it. For Jacob, the journey had been long and painful, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the future. Jacob's life had become a testament to resilience and the power of starting over. He and Emily decided to take the next step in their relationship by moving in together. The decision felt natural, a reflection of the trust and love they had built over time. The process of merging their lives brought unexpected joy. Emily's vibrant personality added warmth to Jacob's space, and her thoughtful touches, like potted plants on the windowsills and colorful artwork on the walls, made their home feel more alive. One evening, as they unpacked a box of Emily's belongings, Jacob found a small framed photo of her with her late father. You look so happy here, Jacob said, smiling. Emily nodded, her eyes softening. He taught me so much about love and respect. I think he'd be proud of us. Jacob placed the photo on the mantel, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the life they were building together. Meanwhile, Claire's descent into regret reached its lowest point. She struggled to move forward, haunted by memories of what she had lost. Her attempts to rebuild her social life were met with cold shoulders, and her professional reputation continued to suffer. One day, while walking through the city, Claire spotted Jacob and Emily at a cafe. They were laughing, their heads close together as they shared a private joke. Claire froze, her heart sinking as she watched them. She wanted to approach Jacob, to say something, anything, but she knew it would only make things worse. As she turned away, tears welled up in her eyes. She realized that Jacob had truly moved on, leaving her behind in the wake of her own choices. Jacob, unaware of Claire's presence, was focused on the future. He had been invited to showcase his photography at a prestigious gallery, an opportunity that marked a significant milestone in his career. Emily stood by his side on the night of the event, her excitement matching his own. You've worked so hard for this, she said, squeezing his hand. Jacob smiled, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. The gallery was filled with visitors admiring his work, and Jacob felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't experienced in years. His journey from betrayal to success was now immortalized through the lens of his camera. As the night wound down, Jacob found himself in a quiet moment of reflection. Standing before one of his photographs, a stark black and white image of a lone tree in a barren field. He thought about how far he had come. Emily joined him, slipping her arm through his. "It's beautiful," she said, gazing at the photo. "But it's also a little sad." Jacob nodded. "It represents where I was when I took it. Alone, but still standing." Emily smiled. "And now you're not alone anymore." Jacob turned to her, his heart full. "No, I'm not. And I never will be again." For Claire, the days blurred into a monotonous routine. She tried to focus on her work and find solace in small moments, but the weight of her decisions was inescapable. One evening, she came across an old photo of herself and Jacob, taken during a vacation years ago. They looked so happy, so in love. She held the photo tightly, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, Jacob, for everything." But her apology, like so many others, would go unheard. Jacob's journey continued, each step bringing him closer to the life he had always deserved. He and Emily began planning their next adventure, a trip to Europe where they would explore new cultures and create memories that would last a lifetime. As they packed for their trip, Emily turned to Jacob with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" she asked. Jacob paused, a smile tugging at his lips. "Every day, and I'm grateful for all of it, the good and the bad. It made me who I am." That night, as they boarded the plane, Jacob felt a sense of closure he hadn't anticipated. The betrayal that once consumed him was now just a distant memory, a lesson that had shaped his path but no longer defined it. Sitting beside Emily, he looked out at the night sky, the stars shining brightly against the darkness. "This," he thought, "is what it means to truly move on." Jacob and Emily's European adventure was everything they had hoped for and more. From the cobblestone streets of Paris to the canals of Venice, each destination offered them a chance to deepen their bond and create memories that would last a lifetime. One evening, while dining at a cozy restaurant overlooking the Amalfi Coast, Emily raised her glass to Jacob. "To new chapters," she said, her smile warm and genuine. Jacob clinked his glass with hers. "And to the people who make them worth writing." As they laughed and shared stories, Jacob realized just how far he had come. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. Back home, Claire's world remained a stark contrast. She spent her days working tirelessly, trying to escape the emptiness that filled her life. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the memories of what she had lost. One afternoon, she received an invitation in the mail, a gallery showcase featuring Jacob's photography. The thought of seeing him again made her heart race, but she knew she couldn't stay away. On the night of the event, Claire entered the gallery, her steps hesitant. The space was filled with Jacob's work, each photograph telling a story of resilience and beauty. As she moved through the room, she spotted Jacob and Emily standing together, their happiness evident in every gesture and glance. Claire felt a pang of longing, but she also knew she had no place in his life anymore. She approached one of the photographs, a stunning image of a sunrise breaking through a stormy sky. The caption beneath it read, "After the storm, there is light." Claire's eyes filled with tears as she realized the depth of Jacob's journey and how far he had come without her. Jacob noticed Claire from across the room, but didn't approach her. He felt no anger, no resentment, just a quiet sense of closure. She was a part of his past, and he had moved on. Emily noticed his gaze and followed it to Claire. "Do you want to talk to her?" she asked gently. Jacob shook his head. There's nothing left to say." Emily smiled, taking his hand. "Then let's focus on the present." As the event wound down, Jacob gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support. He spoke about his journey, not just as an artist, but as a person. "I've learned that life isn't about the storms we face, but how we choose to rise above them. Every challenge, every heartbreak, has shaped me into who I am today. And for that, I'm grateful." The audience erupted in applause, their admiration evident. Claire left the gallery quietly, her heart heavy but her mind clearer than it had been in months. She knew she had no one to blame but herself, and for the first time, she resolved to make changes, not for Jacob, but for her own peace. Jacob and Emily celebrated the success of the event with a quiet dinner at home. As they reflected on the evening, Emily asked, "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive her?" Jacob thought for a moment before replying, "I already have, not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger only holds you back." Emily nodded, her admiration for him growing. "You're a better person than most, Jacob." Jacob smiled. "No, I'm just someone who learned the hard way that life is too short to dwell on the past." As they sat together, surrounded by the warmth of their home, Jacob felt a deep sense of contentment. His journey had been painful, but it had led him to a place of peace and fulfillment. For the first time in years, he was excited about the future, and he knew that with Emily by his side, anything was possible. Jacob's life had become a celebration of the present and a testament to his resilience. The gallery's success had opened new doors for him, and his photography was now being recognized internationally. He was invited to participate in a global exhibition, and Emily insisted they celebrate this milestone with another trip, this time to Asia. "I hear Kyoto is breathtaking in the spring," Emily said one evening as they planned their trip. Jacob nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Let's go see it together." The anticipation of the trip filled their days with excitement, but it was the journey itself that solidified their bond even further. In Kyoto, under the blooming cherry blossoms, Jacob found himself reflecting on the path that had brought him there. The betrayal that once defined him now felt like a distant memory, a storm that had long since passed. As he and Emily walked through the serene gardens, hand in hand, he turned to her. "Thank you for being patient with me," he said. Emily looked at him, her eyes full of warmth. "Jacob, you've taught me more about strength and love than you'll ever know. I'm the lucky one." Jacob felt a deep sense of peace. With Emily, he had not only found love, but also a partnership that honored his past while embracing the future. Back home, Claire had started her own journey of self-discovery. She had moved to a smaller city, taking a new job that allowed her to focus on personal growth. The isolation that once consumed her was replaced by a determination to rebuild her life. One evening, as she unpacked in her modest apartment, she came across an old notebook filled with her dreams and goals from years ago. "I let so much slip away," she whispered to herself, "but I can still start over." For Claire, it was the first step toward healing, a step she had avoided for far too long. Jacob, meanwhile, was thriving in every aspect of his life. His global exhibition was a resounding success, earning him accolades and even offers to publish a coffee table book of his work. At the exhibit's closing event, Emily surprised Jacob with a toast in his honor. "To Jacob," she said, her voice steady and heartfelt. "A man who turned pain into art, betrayal into strength, and heartbreak into inspiration. You are proof that life doesn't end with loss. It begins again with courage." The room erupted in applause, and Jacob felt a swell of gratitude. He had come so far, and he knew that his journey was only just beginning. Claire, too, found closure in her own way. She wrote one final letter to Jacob, not to seek reconciliation, but to acknowledge the person he had become. "Jacob, I've watched from afar as you've built a life that inspires so many. You deserve every bit of happiness and success. I'm sorry for the pain I caused, but I'm also proud of the man you've become. Thank you for teaching me what it means to truly value someone. I wish you and Emily all the best. Claire." She mailed the letter, knowing it was unlikely she would hear back, but for the first time, she felt at peace. When Jacob received the letter, he read it quietly, his emotions a mixture of closure and relief. He didn't feel the need to respond. His life was no longer tethered to the past, and Claire's words, while appreciated, didn't hold the same weight they once might have. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, a reminder of how far he had come. Months later, Jacob and Emily stood on the balcony of their new home, a beautiful space they had chosen together, symbolizing the life they were building as partners. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jacob wrapped an arm around Emily. "This is it," he said softly. "This is everything I've ever wanted." Emily smiled, leaning into him. "And it's only the beginning." For Jacob, the journey of healing, growth, and love had come full circle. The betrayal that once defined him was now just a memory, a chapter in a story that had led to something far greater,